FB? Film buff? Who's FB? Hey, is that a faint smile? Ooh. That's a lot of attention. Wow, look at this shot though. She retreats into the darkness there. Huh. FB. Someone that brings her comfort. I'm potentially looking at a new character. But yeah, you know, 5 days Ocarina has now spent in this timeline, and the satellite is still there, lodged into the radio building. I mean, I was about to ask, you know, how come there's no, I don't know, crew or, you know, people looking into it, but they kind of answered it, right? It's unknown. The origin is unknown, so kind of checks out. Interesting title. Perhaps a bit of chaos theory. I like this. I love this for her. She's the best, man. She really is. Hey, full house. Shooting daggers. I've yet to see a single customer though. How does this guy make a profit? Or even break even? Labo member. Just like that. Doesn't want to get attached. It's open. So she heard all of that. I mean, you know a few things. Right. That's one of those things. I love this guy. And the performance, man, it's honestly one of the better performances in anime. I like it. Oh. It's an interesting dynamic, right? Having Mayuri be a part of this as well. I need to watch that movie. The girl that left to the past. Adorable. Oh, she's cooking. I love that reaction he has. D-mail, simple enough. Go on then. Do share. Okay. 12 to 6. Oh. She's everyone's sister, big sister. Yuri Field. Okay, 8 seconds in. He opened it. Oh. Look at that. But why? Ooh, Mayuri Upa. I remember that. So it gets split up. Like the original, someone stabbed Makise Kurisu. Right, it's in English. A limitation. Limits are good. Oh, it's covered. Yeah. Ooh. Oh, the whispering. I love that part of this score, of this track. You sure have. I was hoping for some of this in the last episode. It's been cut a bit short because she showed up, but let's see. Daru. Whoa. I mean, she is attractive. Kiryu Moeka. Okay, yeah. He zeroes in on that. On those, rather. Oh, she didn't even realize it. Not subtle, is it? This guy and his backstories. So she says she hasn't met her before, like even in the future. Still no customers. The man just does it for the love of it. You have to respect it, I guess. Oh, okay. Go on then. She's in her element now. Okay. I'll come back to this. Limits. Can you though? Sometimes it's split into 3 messages. Oh. I mean, she's onto something. Oh gosh. I mean, they even pull all-nighters and everything, right? Oh, look how much that means. But then, yeah. Immediately just, oh, put a pin in that. Look at this. The stars Mayuri's always reaching for. The ones that are always there. Wow, look at the stripped bare. Kurisu, right? Whoa, beautiful stuff. Time and space have switched places. Look at this. Interesting. If you compare this to the opening of the series, episode 1. Huh. Wow. Again, that's the second time. Isn't it interesting that they specify AD? I remember seeing that before as well. Okay, so dream sequence, right? Whoa, hold on. How does she know about this place? Did he tell her, like, off screen, or a lot of low angles for her? Did he? I guess he did send a message. Oh, so he was expecting her. Careful, man. Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting choice there to animate it in this manner. It's a bit more than that, isn't it? I don't know about this, man. There's just... Okay, time out. This goes back to... original owner. Oh, he said it! He said it! She knows! Kiryu. This doesn't feel right, man. There's too many unknowns about her still. Oh god. Too late now. Ooh, the tone just shifted, man. FB. So she doesn't actually know FB? I mean... Oh god, this music. It feels off, man. It just feels off, doesn't it? And that eerie and unsettling music doesn't help either. I mean, it's incredible. I almost felt like I was in a trance for a moment. I've got to look that up, of course. Okay, so Labo member 005, Kiryu Moeka. Yeah. Yeah, that ending, man. It's ominous. And not just that ending, just, you know, everything from the point of her saying that she's heading up the stairs, right? You know, step by step, I got even more concerned, right? As she begins to make demands, or maybe not, you know, demands might be a little bit harsh, but as her requests begin to escalate, right? Oh, you know, I would like to take photos. I would like to, you know, borrow it, right? Can you help me take it out? You know, it's not even a question of, oh, you know, please let me borrow it. It, you know, she jumps straight to, can you help me take it out? Right? And, you know, this time I'm making a note of mentioning her taking the photos because, you know, there's a bit of new context, right? This unknown, I mean, you know, Moeka herself is still quite the unknown, you know? And the crazy thing is, if you compare her to someone like, I don't know, Suzuha, Amane Suzuha, you know, in comparison, Suzuha essentially feels like an open book, right? In terms of, you know, motives and in terms of just the feeling you get from this character. Anytime she's around, you know, characters such as Okarin and, you know, his friends, you know, I can say right now that I do not, for a moment, not even a part of me feels that Suzuha is someone that could or is going to hurt, you know, Okarin and his friends in any capacity, at least not, you know, deliberately. You know, that's my take on on Suzuha 6 episodes in, right? And again, you know, more is added throughout this episode as well, to, you know, Suzuha's lore, right? In my, I don't know, understanding of Suzuha and my trust in Suzuha, right? If that makes sense, right? I don't feel uneasy anytime Suzuha is around that crew, anytime she's around Okarin. You know, like I said, you know, on a few occasions, you can see just how much respect she has for someone like Okarin, right? And again, you know, this can easily kind of go to that notion, that idea of her being a time traveler. Listen, at this point, it'd be a little bit silly to still kind of be on the fence about this, right? This is someone from the future. This is someone that has time traveled. The series itself, right, the writing of the story itself is not trying to trick anyone, right? It's as clear as it gets. You know, I make it a point to point out that it's not subtle, is it? Right? Because it's not trying to be subtle, at least in my opinion. You know, I really do firmly believe that there is dramatic irony at play here, and it has been at play for some time now. I mean, you could go all the way back to her first appearance, you know, back to episode 2, then and there's some telltale signs that this could be a time traveler. And then, of course, episode by episode, that just becomes even more concrete. And at this point, I think it'd be silly to still kind of, dabble in the whole, there's a possibility, there's a good chance she's a time traveler. No, from this point on, I'm always just going to speak as if she is from the future, because that's how the story is presenting this character, right? Even in this episode, you see as Okurine kind of, tries to get a bit more information out of her in terms of, this grudge that she seems to have against Makise Kurisu, right? And you see that Okurine is actually legitimately interested, right, in learning about this, right? And again, there she said something like, no, nothing happened in the past, right? Again, not subtle, but it's pointing towards, okay, her understanding and her opinion of Makise Kurisu, again, given that initial aggressive, almost muscle memory reaction to seeing her, right? Again, getting into combat pose or combat mode just at the sight of Makise Kurisu, right? Again, that is quite telling in terms of, okay, the types of things that Makise might have done in this future, right? Or the things leading up to this future. But I think the really interesting thing here is that she essentially tells us, the audience, and Okurine as well, that she's never actually met her before, right? Yes, now she's met her, right? She's seen her in person, as I spoke of that, reaction that she had a couple of episodes ago. And again, in this episode as well. And the thing is, she didn't even realize that, that's the look on her face, right? Okurine had to kind of remind her, and she's kind of a little bit surprised about it. But the point I'm trying to make here is that she hasn't actually met her, right, up until this point, right? And she's meeting her in the past, again, from Suzuha's perspective, right? She hasn't actually met her in the future, in this future, a really harsh one that Suzuha comes from. Again, this kind of almost links her to the possibility of also being John Teeter, right? Because John Teeter describes this dystopian future, right, under the iron fist of CERN. So again, there's that strong possibility that Suzuha could also be John Teeter. But the point being, based on the things that Suzuha is saying here, she hasn't actually seen Makise Kurisu do any of these things in person, right? Now, listen, it doesn't mean that, Makise Kurisu doesn't end up doing something, but I think it should be noted, right, that Suzuha has knowledge about this, right, that's been given to her, right? It's perhaps knowledge that is common knowledge, right, in this future that she comes from. But again, I think it should be noted that she doesn't actually have a first-hand experience of, seeing Makise Kurisu do some of these things that Suzuha believes are, again, unforgivable, perhaps, right? So I think that should be noted. There could be, it's tough to know the type of thing that Makise Kurisu ends up doing. So, the reasoning behind it, there's quite a few possibilities still, right? I know Suzuha has quite a damning appraisal of Makise Kurisu, but I'm not able to kind of cross that bridge just yet, And this brings me back to my point about Kiryu Moeka and there being new context now for all of these photos and the record that she's keeping of all the places that she's going to. And now, inside of the future gadgets lab, right? Taking photos of, the IBM 5100 and just the lab itself. And I'm sure on the way in, she's taking photos of, the exterior, right? And everything. She really likes to document all these things. But now it's much more concerning than before because there is this new player, right? New player in the game, FB. This is someone that is in direct contact, in constant contact at that, if you go back to the beginning of the episode, right? This correspondence is just, it's an ongoing thing. It's not as if she is kind of, just always hoping to hear back from FB. No, it's a constant correspondence. And again, like I said, and you don't really need to even say it, it's clear to see this is someone that is a bit of a constant, bit of a support system for Kiryu, right? After that, panic-induced moment of being approached by the crew, the television crew, and then retreating to, the safety of the darkness of the alleys. or the shadows in the alleys. You see that hearing back from this FB person kind of, brings her out of all of that. Again, brings her out of that panic. And the really bizarre thing about the whole thing is that she hasn't actually met this FB person, right? Not in person, because she actually thought that Okarine could be FB, right? And this comes after, all this talk of, sending messages back in time and time travel and time machines starts just pouring out of the whole lab, or all of the members, right? Listen, here, I think there's a clear depiction of just how careless all of them have become or are in this moment, right? It's quite a laissez-faire attitude in there. And you see, surprisingly, Okarine's the one who's trying his best to not leak this information in front of this outsider, right? But again, it just one by one, they all just keep talking about it, right? They didn't care that there is some new person standing in there. Yes, Daru saw her earlier, and there's quite a comedic run-in. And listen, the thing is, even beyond that, the whole thing is kind of like this open secret at this point. They make it a point to once again, focus on the open window, right? They make it a point to show Suzuha again as she reacts to them talking inside, right? As Okarine fills Mayuri in about the whole thing. And then, of course, a little bit later on, he regrets that. He has a lot of concern that he's now kind of brought Mayuri into all of this, dragged her into all of this, right? And, this is after he actually had quite a bit of concern for Makise Kurisu a couple of episodes ago, right? He asked her to leave. She's got a bright future ahead of her. She shouldn't get, mixed up in all of this. Of course, there's no chance that Makise was ever going to leave, but, he had legitimate concern. Yet a couple of episodes later, he did bring Mayuri in on all of this information as well. And, bringing Mayuri in on all of this information is a little bit different, right? In comparison to Makise Kurisu, in comparison to Daru. And I am going to explore that a little bit later on in the episode and explore, again, the beating heart of this anime, of this story, Mayuri. But yeah, going back to this ominous new figure in the story, FB, someone who's in direct contact with Kiryu Moeka, things just really got uneasy at that point. Even if you look at the actual presentation, right, the score itself, it's eerie. It certainly has an ominous tone to it. This is, it's different. It's as simple as that. It just felt different. Like I said, throughout that scene, step by step, beat by beat, I just kept getting more and more uneasy about the whole thing. And by the end of it, Moeka knows a lot, right? And not just that, she's now a labo member. I just really love saying it like that. But yeah, she's now a lab member as well. So she is going to continue gaining more insight about the whole thing. And, like I said, there's a lot of unknowns about Moeka. But now the thing is, some of that concern, or a lot of that concern, has shifted to this unknown of FB, right? Because, now, again, after this appearance as well, and, again, her demeanor in this episode, and not even knowing FB in person, yeah, it's not so much so that I think, Moeka could actually harm them. It's more so about this unknown of FB now. But, going back to that moment I spoke of, before Okarine lets her through, in my mind, I'm just kind of, thinking, okay, Okarine, careful now, let the right one in, right? That's my thought process in that moment, right? And you see that, that the anime itself, the story itself, is also presenting it in that manner, right? Because it holds on that, on that moment, before and after she enters. Now, again, I had quite a bit of concern about her knowing the location, the address, and all of that, to the point that she's just strolling right up the stairs. Now, it appears that, he doesn't outright confirm it, but, based on the things he kind of said, he said, I wasn't expecting you this early, meaning he is expecting her. But, again, it doesn't quite confirm that he gave her the address. Now, the thing is, it's plastered outside, as Suzuha pointed out a couple of episodes ago. But even so, you still need to know, the alley, the street, right? Again, it could be as easy as Okarine actually giving her the address. But I don't know, man. Is that something he I don't know. I think that's still an unknown. But the thing is, Ocarine would have made a bigger deal of it, asking her, how the hell did you know about this place? How'd you know about the lab's location or the address itself, right? So I don't know, I'm a little bit unsure about the whole thing, simply because, Ocarine himself didn't really make a big deal of it, right? In terms of her just showing up at the door and at the lab itself. I mean, earlier, in the roundtable meeting scenes, you see he quickly, messages or sends a message back to her, right? It's possible that, he told, just to get her off his back, he might have said something like, okay, come to this place and I'll show it to you and then you've got to go, something along those lines, possibly. So let's see if there's some clarification on that in the next couple of episodes. Hopefully, maybe even in the next episode, right? Because I'll get to see Kiryu Moeka actually be a Labo member. 005. I mean, given all of the unknowns associated with Moeka, and again, now this FB individual, let's see how long that even lasts, right? And, like I said, a lot of these moments, beat by beat, it's kind of like, okay, time out, take a step back. It's almost as if, digging your own grave. You see that Ocarine just, this is after she said, oh, can you help me carry it out? And then, he said, oh, at least you can ask me yourself, right? And she does proceed to ask in person, like a little mouse. You could barely even, make it out as she speaks to him, but, she gave it a shot. At that point, there's another thing Ocarine drops, right? Again, from an audience member standpoint, it's a little bit different, right? I'm thinking, okay, please, just, don't give her too much information now. Don't slip up on too many things here. But Ocarine is not really in that mindset. And at that point, Ocarine proceeds to tell her that he can't really give it to anyone else because he's borrowing it himself, right? And has to return it to the original owner, right? And then he proceeds to tell her the exact, location, right? It belongs to the shrine itself. I can't remember the exact name of the shrine, but it's a specific, right? And you saw the moment he said that, I felt that in my chest. She knows that location, and it's not just that. It's not that she knows it. It's also because of this unknown of this FB person who's clearly getting all of this information from Kiryu Moeka, right? At this point, you simply have to assume that every single photo she's taken since her first appearance, right? Running into Ocarine in the street, right? The first time she brings up that photo of the IBN 5100 and asks Ocarine about it, and then everything since then, and coming up the stairs and taking photos inside of the lab. You simply have to assume now that she's sending all of this to this FB individual, right? And that's cause for concern. And I brought this up a couple of episodes ago, right? Around the time Suzuha mentions, oh, is it an IBN 5100? And again, the location, the shrine itself is brought up again. And I pointed out that, okay, this is going to be something crucial as well, the location of the IBN 5100. It's not done. Again, it's time travel. It's a time travel narrative. So that location is going to be integral. It's going to be crucial throughout the plot of this anime, right? So once again, it comes out, right? I almost said slips out of Ocarine, but he's not even looking at it from that perspective. Again, from the perspective of a first-time audience member, it's a bit different than Ocarine, right? Ocarine is not really looking at it from that perspective. Right, he's a little bit, again, it's a bit of a laissez-faire attitude, like I said a little bit earlier, right? All of them are really kind of careless in front of this person that they don't really know just yet, right? Maybe they'll get to know her. I'm not sure just yet. She just became a member. I'm sure, Mayuri is going to do her part. Now she's got 2, additional female lab members, right? She'll be quite happy, I'm sure of it. And I'm sure, I'll get some great scenes of, Kiryu being a lab member as well. I mean, I certainly hope so. But yeah, at this point, everything that Moeka is going to see and learn about, you simply have to assume that she'll be passing that information on and passing photos on to this FB person, right? So that's a concern. That's quite the concern at this point. And listen, it's been a lot of fun and games, a lot of banter, a lot of wholesome moments, again, slice of life and all of that. But sooner or later, there are going to be consequences. I mentioned this since day one, right? Earlier on in the series, I know it's 6 episodes in, but quite a bit has happened in 6 episodes time. But I've maintained that, you've got to appreciate these moments, because once things escalate to that point and shit hits the fan, all of them are going to be experiencing some not so wholesome moments, right? They'll be going through it. I've maintained that since day one, right? That's just this expectation of a time travel narrative. So at some point, sooner or later, consequences. There are going to be setbacks, right? Devastating setbacks even, right? Reality checks. By the time you do get to the conclusion of this episode, you do feel a shift, right? For me, it's a clear before and after. This is the first time I'm actually legitimately concerned for Okarin and his friends, right? Because now there's too many unknowns being introduced, right? Unknowns about Moeka. There's this complete unknown about this FB person, to the point that even Moeka doesn't actually know this FB person in person. And then, of course, even before that, you see there's a lot of doubts, right? Okarin has a lot of doubts, concerns about the direction all of this is kind of heading into. And it feels inevitable, doesn't it, right? The concerns about the people that are kind of brought in on this. Again, Mayuri being the standout in all of this, right? He's got really specific concern about Mayuri kind of being dragged into all of this now. Because ultimately, she's not really in on all the technicalities of the stuff that, Daru and Okarin and Magise Kurisu are into, right? Yet, I think she's just as important to the group itself, to the lab itself. And then, beyond that, I think she's one of the most crucial members of this incredible ensemble cast. Her light, her positivity, her charm, her attitude around the rest of them. She brings a totally different type of perspective, a much needed perspective that, the others are not capable of, right? They might be quite capable in, certain regards, right? Science and hacking and all of that. But there's some things that only someone like Mayuri can bring. There's a specific perspective that only Mayuri can bring, right? Her emotional intelligence. And, quickly kind of going back to this point about Mayuri actually having this really unique perspective that the others are not able to have, because she's not really caught up in all of the details, right? She's not caught up in all of it like they are. So, because of that, she is able to have this really unique clarity and is able to see the bigger picture before them at times. And, sometimes she's the one who points out some of these things. But, the thing is, characters like Daru and Okarin that have known Mayuri for some time, they know, that Mayuri is different, right? But it's not that they're expecting her to be in on all the sciencey stuff, right? And the hacking stuff. They know her role in the group and they accept it. But, kind of going back to this idea of Okarin's growing concern about, bringing Mayuri in all of this now. Daru and Makise knew the things that they're signing up for, right? They understand. But Mayuri, for her, it's as simple as, okay, Okarin is saying this, I trust Okarin, and yeah, she's trusting Okarin's judgment, right? But, the thing is, like I said a little bit earlier, there's a really great scene. And in that scene, Mayuri actually plays a role as well. It's again, the roundtable meeting, and it's such a charming scene, right? Them coming up with the names for, the messages to the past. Ultimately, they arrive on D-mail, right? Perfect. At the end of the day, it's perfect, even though I think Nostalgia Drive is actually quite a cool name. I thought so, at least, until it immediately got shut down. But yeah, in that scene, she's charming. She does her own thing. She has her own input on the names. A lot of Back to the Future references. Ultimately, it appears that they used DeLorean mail, but instead they're calling it D-mail. And again, there's a few other references. You have Daru name dropping the girl that leapt through time. I think I accidentally said the girl that leapt to the past. I think I said that during the episode. But yeah, that's another anime movie that I do want to watch. I've known about it for some time. But yeah, I'll come back to that part of the episode in a bit. Let's kind of focus on the conclusion, because again, there's quite a bit that's happening here, right? In terms of the things that are at play now, right? That cannot be stopped. I mean, at this point, 6 episodes in, and again, I get some really interesting scenes with Okarin in this one as well. I mean, it's clear at this point that Okarin is at a crossroads, right? He knows things will never be the same again. Never. And there's plenty of doubt about it, right? Yet he keeps moving forward, right? Just like Magise Kurisu implores him to do in this nightmare sequence, this dream sequence, this residual thing, I don't know, thing that, yeah, I'll get to that, man. It's bizarre and it's fascinating, captivating. It's also, mixed with a bit of body horror, right? And I'm speaking of that dream sequence as he's stripped bare, right? Nothing to hide from, no masks, no personas, nothing, right? Him being summoned in front of that black hole, right? Him being summoned by the universe, even, right? And that's the next point I'm about to make here. Yes, at this point, he does keep moving forward with, life's natural forward momentum. Yet, at the same time, the universe itself has a really funny way of keeping people humble. Always. The universe is undefeated. And this is that point I made a little bit earlier, right? This idea of consequences and reality checks, devastating setbacks, and all of that. And that, ultimately, this other entity that's out there in CERN, they are going to have their say on all of this, right? They are going to come into the story at some point, right? And like I said, given a lot of these unknowns surrounding, again, Moika, and then, this person FB that she communicates with constantly, right? There is a possibility that CERN is now beginning to maybe creep into all of this, right? Into their business, right? Because again, CERN and the Future Gadgets Lab are the two, right, that are kind of established as people or groups that are attached to time travel, right? Be it the creation of time travel, be it the use of time travel. So sooner or later, CERN is going to make their presence known as well. And again, I mentioned a few episodes ago, some of the things that are taking place in that lab are monumental, historic, right? History changing. And, sooner or later, CERN is either going to, piggyback on it, or CERN requires certain things to play out, right? Before they, hijack certain components of it, or, they adapt components of it or the ideas of it into their own time travel, mechanics. Now, I know about CERN's failed Jellyman experiments, but, according to John Teeter, CERN certainly, masters or has a strong grasp on time travel, right, in this dystopian future. And, the crazy thing about all of this is that this is just kind of discussing the things taking place in this timeline, I've got a whole segment coming up about, this idea of Okrin spending 5 days now, as confirmed by the opening, the satellite being lodged into the radio building for 5 days now. And that, the fact that it's kind of unknown, the origin of it is unknown, the country of origin rather is unknown. They haven't really touched it. No one's really able to go close to it or near it, right? Again, rules and regulations and all of that, the unknown nature of it all. But again, there's still so many questions about that. Realistically speaking, a satellite from space is not going to be arriving in one piece. That's just not the trajectory of something that shoots in from space, right? That satellite could not survive in that piece, in one piece, and actually make it to the building, right? And crash into the building, lodged into the side of the building. You would think it would just absolutely shatter the whole place, right? So you have to think from a realistic standpoint, are people thinking about that component of it? That this shouldn't be possible. A satellite shouldn't be coming from space, shooting down from space and, crashing into the building in this capacity, because again, it's not really possible, right? So there's always that idea as well. So yeah, for now, it's kind of untouchable and is untouched because of the unknown nature of the whole thing, right? But yeah, 5 days Ocarina is spent in this timeline, right? Again, it's not even the timeline that I see in the original episode, the first episode rather, right? This is a different timeline that Ocarina shifted into. And even though they've been really quite successful now in sending a lot of these messages back, a couple of them now confirmed being sent back, and again, the Gel Nana and all of that, clearly none of these messages are substantial enough to change the timeline again, right? To have Ocarina go through that thing he goes through, that process that he goes through, that really funky and almost, mindfuck, personified moment that happens to him in episode 1, right? As he shifted from that timeline into this new timeline, right? In this timeline, Makise Kurisu has not died, right? That has not happened since, right? He hasn't shifted into a new timeline since. So, you know, there's also that question of, okay, how do you, okay, let's kind of look into it. You know, some of these messages are kind of tame, aren't they, in comparison to something like, oh, I think someone stabbed Makise Kurisu, right? That is kind of like a life and death type thing. And it does end up shifting the timeline into one, or to the one that has a Makise Kurisu that is alive, right? The other messages are, again, I suppose, quite inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. You've got messages like Okarin is a pervert. You've got other messages like the one in this one, Okarin is an airhead. So yeah, again, you know, logically, you can just kind of see that, you know, these are not the types of messages that are going to have that type of impact, right, on the timeline. So yeah, you know, 6 episodes in, there's been one shift into a different timeline. And that happened all the way back in episode 1. But again, you know, sooner or later, I am expecting other messages perhaps to be substantial enough that they can, you know, possibly change the timeline again, right? And there you could have this moment of Okarin finally kind of going, okay, it's that same thing that happened, right, all that time ago, or, you know, 5 days ago, essentially. So, you know, now it's not, you know, it's not as crazy as it might have seemed to him, right? The next time this kind of thing happens, and I'm sure it is going to happen again at some point, you know, him actually shifting over to another timeline and again maintaining his memories, right? Being immune, exempt from the memory reconstruction phase of it. Then he can really kind of begin to think about it as a bit of an outlier, a constant that, okay, you know, it wasn't that he's hallucinating or, you know, he's having a bad day or, you know, he just, again, you know, imagined all of it up. This is something that's happening just to him, right? And I'm really, really quite excited for something like that to happen, right? I think I just kind of have to be patient. It'll happen again at some point. But again, like I said, the last time it happened, it's a matter of life and death, right? The message about Makise Kurisu getting stabbed. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, it has to be something of that magnitude, right? But, you know, it's an interesting concept or interesting thing to think about, right? The possibilities of it, you know, okay, so if it doesn't have to be that every single time, you know, what other kind of message or changes, potential changes could actually shift the timeline, right? Because some of these other messages are clearly inconsequential. But, you know, another reason that's such an exciting prospect, you know, him potentially changing, you know, timelines again, once Okarin actually starts explaining his experiences, right? This exemption that he seems to have, and all of the other lab members kind of learning about all of these rules, right? The shifting of the timelines, the world lines, right? That's going to be so exciting to see how they kind of handle that, how they react to all of this information. Hell, you know, he still hasn't brought up, you know, that he actually saw Makise dead. And again, you know, if you look at it from Okarin's perspective, it's quite a difficult thing to even think about, right? And kind of live with, let alone, you know, tell Makise Kurisu about it. But again, sooner or later, you know, things are going to escalate. And, you know, at some point he is going to have to explain some of these things and explain his experiences. But again, you know, explaining that you seem to be the odd man out or the outlier or the one and only person that is exempt from the memory reconstruction aspect of it, there's still the big question, you know, why Okarin? You know, what's so special about Okarin, right? I'm sure I'll get that answer at some point as well, right? I've got plenty of episodes ahead of me. So yeah, even though there is, you know, cause for concern, you know, legitimate concern now for these characters, you know, due to the unknown factors that are now, you know, full on being introduced, there's still some exciting things ahead. Now, you know, that kind of raises another question. I do have a time traveler that is actually present at the moment, a time traveler that is traveling back in time in this timeline, right? In Suzaha. So if, or, you know, once this timeline changes again, or Okarin, you know, jumps to a different timeline again, right? How exactly is someone like Suzaha, a time traveler, you know, a different type of time traveler, how exactly is that going to affect Suzaha? I mean, I suppose it all kind of comes down to how much a timeline is going to change, right? Because again, if you go back to the original timeline and the John Teeter aspect of it, you see that in the new timeline that Okarin does shift into, John Teeter is a bit different. That story is a bit different, than the one he comes from. Again, the original timeline in episode 1, or at least in the first half of episode 1. So is the next possible shifting of the timeline about to bring about some of these substantial changes, right? Or 1 or 2 substantial changes, or it might not be as substantial, or it could be even more substantial, right? That's the unknown at this point. But, as I am on the topic of Suzuha, that kind of reminds me of a point I was making a little bit earlier about the open window. So yes, it's clear that Suzuha has overheard a lot of this information, right? But who else, right? It's easy. It can be really easy to forget that, these places are accessible to others as well, right? Even though, like I point out, you don't ever see a single customer at the shop that she's an employee of, right? And even that right there is a little bit bizarre that, Mr. Braun is able to hire a part-time employee, right? Listen, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe, it's not the type of detail that they need to be showing me, a customer every now and then. I think you could show me someone in the background every now and then, right? But yeah, as of this point, it doesn't appear that, it's like a shop that's really in demand. Again, given the nature of the shop itself, and, the things it specializes in, I suppose, it makes sense. But then, piggybacking on that idea of customers or potential customers, say, there is a customer, right? And they are going to the shop. They could hear something, right? And sure, a random customer or someone like Mr. Braun, who's clearly just kind of, I don't know, he's indifferent to the whole thing, right? He thinks it's just nonsense. It's just kids doing stuff. It doesn't really register for him in terms of the actual specifics of it. So of course, someone like him has heard most of these things as well, right? If Suzuha has heard him, he's heard these types of things as well. But again, he's kind of indifferent to the whole thing, right? As Oak Green goes into the shop to apologize, and I kind of get to see for the first time just how much of an impact that actual process has on the structure itself, the building itself, right? It rocks the whole building. To the point of seasoning his ramen with dust and, nuts and bolts and all of that, right? So, he said, what the hell are you guys even doing up there? So it's not really sensitive information to someone like him, right? It's almost kind of like falling on deaf ears. But then as a hypothetical, let's look at, potential CERN spies coming in under the guise of a customer at the shop. Right? That's a possibility. Ultimately, the point I'm trying to make here is that, there's got to be others that have heard, some of the stuff that they're talking about up there, beyond Suzuha as well. Before Suzuha as well, right? Suzuha just kind of recently showed up on the scene. But, once again, let's kind of shift the focus to Moeka, right? And this FB person. Now you kind of do have to ask the question, how exactly or why exactly has she become so attached to this person, right? How exactly did it get to this point? Again, especially because she hasn't even met this person in person. This is someone, again, that brings her comfort, keeps her company, again, a constant correspondence. And, it's one of the only things that can actually legitimately make her smile, make her happy, right? Pull her out of the dumps, if you will. But, in terms of some of the possibilities, I kind of go back to that idea of, okay, I'm just assuming now that everything that she's been documenting, she's been sending to the FB person as well, right? So as far as possibilities are concerned, is there some kind of give or take at play here, right? Has she agreed to something? Right? I mean, if you look at the tone of it, you see that this is someone that she actually seems to care for, right? So it doesn't feel like, Moeka is someone that's being, I don't know, strong-armed, right, into doing any of these things. But again, just because it doesn't appear that she's being strong-armed doesn't mean that, she might not get bamboozled. Because again, I'll reiterate, I don't trust this unknown entity that is FB. I just don't even know enough or anything rather, other than, again, that this person is in direct contact with Moeka, right? Who herself is a bit of an unknown. But also on the flip side, what if? And it's a time travel narrative, so a lot of things are on the table, a possibility. What if it is someone I know, already, right? Maybe one of the future gadget members, future gadgets lab members, right? Maybe a different, I don't know, a future version of one of them, perhaps, right? That's always a possibility. This is something I explored back in episode 1, that in a time travel narrative, a lot of different moving pieces are already at play. And in terms of further speculation, there's characters like Ruka, right? There's characters like Ferris. There's characters like Ruka's father, right? Can any of them be FB, right? Who knows? Who knows? Here's the thing. Out of the 3 names I just kind of toss in the hat, I'd say the most likely, even if it's not really that likely at all, is maybe Ferris, right? And even then, it could be like, Ferris has something else going on, right? And she might have been roped into doing this, But again, this is just a bit of a far-fetched theory, I suppose. Just speculation, right? It's always fun to kind of go down the rabbit hole. But speaking of fathers, how about Makise's father? Yeah, okay. That raises it up a bit, The levels go up a bit in terms of, okay, that's perhaps a slim possibility, right? Makise also mentioned her mom. I don't think, there's been no other connection to any of this, to the narrative itself. So yeah, let's just cross that immediately. But Makise's dad, you never know. It's a possibility. It's on the table, right? It's in the hat. The name is in the hat. But again, given my own experiences with time travel narratives and these types of unknowns, one thing I'm sure of, right? Either sure, it could be a completely new character that I simply know nothing about, or it could be a bit of a bombshell moment, and it is someone that I already know, right? You see that a lot in time travel narratives, right? That the answer's been in front of you. So yeah, from this point on, I'm obsessively going to be looking for anything FB related, right? Again, anytime Moeka is on screen, anytime she's messaging, anytime, new information comes up that, Moeka gets to learn about for the first time. Yeah, I'll have to, take note of the things this unknown person could now know, right? In terms of the future gadgets lab or, the things that are developing in there. And again, now that there is another person attached to Moeka in FB, this whole notion of her really wanting the IBN 5100, now you can even kind of, explore the possibility of, okay, maybe it's not even her that requires it. Maybe it is this FB person that requires it and she's trying to get it, retrieve it, right? She's been on it since day 1. So yeah, it really added another dimension to Moeka's character and her motives. Yeah, man, I've got to say, this is just really exciting stuff. It really is. I feel it's a distinct feeling that I had during Dark, right? That's the last time I felt this really distinct feeling. So yeah, it bodes well for the series itself, the reaction analysis series, that I'm really, really quite dialed in and really quite, excited about the whole thing. And just, I took to the characters really early on as well. So yeah, it's shaping up. It's shaping up nicely. But kind of going back to Moeka and this idea, this notion of her actually being far more comfortable, just messaging, right, to the point that that's her true nature coming out in those messages, right, in comparison to her actually having to face people, right. It's too much anxiety for her, right. She ultimately kind of has to confirm it outright for Okarin because he's getting a little bit frustrated about the whole thing, right? He's like, you're right in front of me, how come you can't just talk to me? But there's this interesting dynamic at play here, right? Because Okarin, he pulls out his phone from time to time as well, right? I've seen it since day 1. I think I've kind of analyzed that as a potential coping mechanism for him, right? Anytime he gets in a situation that's a little bit awkward or makes him a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps anytime he begins to feel a bit of that heat, right? You see that he retreats to that phone and he kind of, taps into that persona of his. Again, that persona that is not there, shielding him in that, I don't know, dream sequence, that nightmare that he seems to have, though it could be a collection of those things, right? Given his really unique nature in comparison to everyone else. Again, more on that in a bit. So yeah, I think it's interesting that, both Moeka and Okarine do have that safety blanket, right? Through the phone they fall back on. Okarine uses it to escape really uncomfortable situations, and then she uses it to, kind of gain that distance, to keep people at distance, right? At an arm's length, essentially. But, speaking of Okarine, or, Okabe Rintaro, or Hohin Kyoma, the performance right here is honestly one of the best I've experienced. And it's only 6 episodes in, but, I've seen so much of him already that, I've really taken to it. And yes, I know this is the same actor that does Krollo and Light Yagami. Light Yagami is a bit of an iconic performance as well. Regardless of my opinion on the character itself or Death Note, the performance is still phenomenal as Light Yagami, right? It just is. But, this performance right here, man, I think this already stands out as one of the best I've experienced in anime. And of course, the material, the writing, the character writing for Okarine, for Okabe, it really kind of lends itself to this actor, doesn't it? Right? He really gets to excel and, really stretch his range, given, the eccentric nature of Okabin. I combined the two, of Okarin. But yeah, that scene, the round table scene, my God, it's one of the best. It's one of the better scenes of the anime, one of the most enjoyable scenes of the anime, right? It's great scripting, great banter back and forth. It's great for references, and just again, it's great for the voice acting. And as I am on the topic of, the round table meeting and the scenes around that scene, or the other scenes around that scene, this idea of them, or Okarin rather, having that hypothesis, right? The time of the day. Right, by the end of it all, it's essentially kind of locked in. It's kind of that phase, that time frame between 12 to 6, right? And the thing is, episodes before this, I already saw them pull all-nighters, and at that point they're not able to replicate the Gel Nana phenomenon, and all of that, right? The D-mill phenomenon. And, they do kind of begin to get a little bit frustrated about it, or Daru rather got really quite frustrated about it as well. So at this point, 12 to 6, there's something that happens in that time frame that facilitates this incredible phenomenon. So yeah, that's yet another thing that's going to encourage a lot of speculation as well, right? The 12 to 6 time frame. I mean, let's throw out a few possibilities that come to mind, right? And kind of use other time travel narratives. I'll try my best not to spoil anything, but just a lot of knowledge that's been built up, over the years. Is there any kind of special pocket of energy that's in this area? Maybe a pocket of energy that this building is actually on, or built on rather, right? These are the types of things that can go back decades and decades. Is there maybe something to do with the sun, right? The really specific type of sunlight in that time frame. I mean, that one sounds a little bit far-fetched, but listen, you just never know. There's always a possibility that there could be something else in the area that I do not even know about just yet, right? That could be facilitating one aspect of it, again, in that time frame. Right. So again, these unknowns are so exciting to speculate about. Right. And, that excitement of getting those answers at some point. But also, in terms of any potential pocket of energy, it's rather unique then in that case, isn't it? Because there's a really specific time frame, 12 to 6. Right. So, yeah, it feels like it might be a unique take on the whole thing. And also, like I said, Makise is in her element now. She's really warming up to the whole thing. She's rocking the lab coat as well, of course. And she figures out a few really critical components of it, right? Some of the basics, the foundational elements of it. 120 seconds equates to 5 days in the past, right? Because 1 second on the timer equals 1 hour backward in real time, right? So 120 hours equals 5 days. So now that they know that, let's see if they'll dabble with stuff a little bit further back, right? If that's a possibility at all. And then finally, let's kind of, end it off on this nightmare, this dream sequence, this premonition of sorts, right? Like I said, it could be a mix of all of these things just coming together. But ultimately, it's delivered, or it comes to Okarin in the form of a dream. I mean, there's a strong sense of Okarine's subconscious fears being manifested in this dream sequence. To me, it really kind of felt like Okarin's subconscious fears at this point being manifested in this anxiety-induced dream, right? Again, given all the doubts that he's having recently, a lot of the concerns he's having recently. And again, on top of that, it could also be stuff like premonition, right? Certainly a nightmare element to it as well, right? Body horror and all of that. Maybe even a bit of residual stuff being sprinkled in there, right? Given, again, Okarin's really unique nature and relationship with the memory reconstruction aspect of it all. But the key component of this scene is actually Okarin and how he's presented, right? Like I said, stripped bare, right? Stripped of all of these pretenses, forced to face it, right? Like I said earlier in the discussion, almost as if he's been summoned. Okabe Rintaro has been summoned by the universe, right? As he looks at the path ahead, as he's left exposed, right? He cuts a lonely figure, isolated figure, just surrounded by infinite darkness, right? And there's no one else there to make any choices for him on his behalf. He's the only one. And of course, Makise Kurisu has also manifested into this, again, anxiety-induced dream of his, nightmare even. And now I think 6 episodes in, you're kind of beginning to see this dynamic, right? There's Makise Kurisu, who is becoming quite important to him as well, but there's also, on the flip side of it, Mayuri. Now, I'm not saying, that it has to be one or the other, but, the dynamic is established, right? Makise Kurisu as the star-crossed lover, perhaps, and his childhood friend Mayuri, who he's really quite concerned about. And to me, it really is kind of beginning to feel like that Okarin is going to be in a position to be making an impossible, or having to make an impossible choice at some point, right? A lose-lose, if you will. But, in terms of the things that Makise Kurisu has to say to Okarin, or the things that she's imploring him to do, right, to execute, you must not look back, right? Even if time stretches toward eternity, an end still exists. You must not look back, look forward, reach it. So yeah, even though ultimately it is this anxiety-induced dream or nightmare, there's things that are at play here, within that dream that are things that I'll keep a note of, for sure, right? Like I said, there's possibilities of other things being at play as well, given the unique nature of Okabe, right? In relation to the time travel mechanics of this narrative. But yeah, I think I'll end it off on that point. If you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you're interested in early access or full opacity or timer-based full length, consider checking out the Patreon page and potentially supporting the channel as well. The links are in the description and the pinned comment. There's also links to social media if that's your thing. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for episode 7. Until then, take it easy.